The Pacific Northwest is full of mysteries, from Bigfoot to ghost stories and, of course, the disappearance of D.B. Cooper.
Another mystery buried deep in the hills of eastern Washington keeps resurfacing, a bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal.
There is a place in Washington state that should not exist. A hole so deep that nothing dropped inside ever makes a sound. 15 miles of rope vanished into it without touching bottom. The government says it is not real, but they also sent men in hazmat suits to guard it. They paid the owner to leave the country and never speak again. For 25 years, no one knew what was down there. Then someone finally sent a camera into the darkness and recorded something standing in the void. Something that was waiting. The voice from the night. It was February 21st, 1997, and millions of Americans were tuned into Coast to Coast AM, the most popular late-night radio show in the country. The host was Art Bell, a man who had built his career on giving voice to the unexplained. His show reached somewhere between 10 and 15 million listeners every single night across more than 500 radio stations. People called in to talk about UFOs, ghosts, government conspiracies, and things that science could not explain. Art Bell never mocked his callers. He listened. He asked questions. And that night, he received a call that would create one of the strangest legends in American history. The caller identified himself as Mel Waters. He spoke calmly and clearly, like a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to sell. He said he owned about 9 acres of rural property near a place called Manastash Ridge, roughly 9 miles west of Ellensburg in Washington state. On that property, he said, there was a hole, not just any hole, a hole that defied every law of nature. Mel described it in precise detail. The opening measured exactly 9 feet and 9 inches across. The first 15 feet were lined with hand-placed bricks, suggesting someone had known about this hole for a very long time. Local people had been calling it the Devil's Hole since the earliest settlers arrived in the region. But here is where the story became impossible to ignore. Mel said he had spent years trying to measure the depth of this hole. He was a former semi-professional shark fisherman, so he had access to industrial fishing line were rated at 20 pounds of test strength. He tied a weight to the end and began lowering it into the darkness. Spool after spool, mile after mile. He claimed to have dropped between 79,000 and 80,000 feet of line into that hole. That is more than 15 miles straight down. The silence was what disturbed him most. When you drop something into a normal hole or well, you hear it hit. You hear a splash or a thud or an echo, but everything that went into this hole simply vanished without a sound. For decades, Mel said, locals had used it as a garbage dump, old refrigerators, broken furniture, dead livestock. None of it ever made a noise. None of it ever filled the hole. Then Mel shared a story that made listeners across America lean closer to their radios. A neighbor had owned a hunting dog that died. Heartbroken but practical, the neighbor threw the body into the hole to dispose of it. A few days later, that same neighbor saw his dog walking through the woods, same collar, same identification tag. The same animal that he had watched die and thrown into that pit was somehow alive again. The neighbor was so terrified that he killed the dog a second time. 3 days after his first call, Mel phoned the show again. His voice was different now, shaken. He said that men in yellow hazmat suits had appeared on his property without warning. They sealed off the entire area and refused to answer any questions. The cover story they gave was that a plane had crashed nearby, but Mel saw no wreckage and no rescue teams. Then came the threat. Mel claimed that a government official told him they could easily find evidence of a laboratory on his property if he did not cooperate. It did not matter if the evidence was real. They would create it. He was given a choice: take a large sum of money and leave the country forever, or face prison. Mel chose to disappear. He boarded a plane to Australia and vanished from public life entirely. No trial, no news coverage, just silence. The same kind of silence that swallowed everything dropped into his impossible hole. Science says impossible. Scientists heard about Mel's claims and immediately began explaining why none of it could be true. A hole like the one he described is not just unlikely. It violates the fundamental laws of physics and geology that govern our planet. To understand why, you need to know what happens as you travel deeper into the Earth. The temperature rises by approximately 25 to 30 degrees Celsius for every kilometer of depth. At 5 miles down, temperatures would reach somewhere between 200 and 240 degrees Celsius. At 15 miles, you would be looking at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to melt most metals. Consider the deepest hole ever drilled by human beings. The Kola Superdeep borehole in Russia took 24 years to complete, from 1970 to 1989. Soviet scientists used the most advanced drilling technology available during the Cold War, and they managed to reach a depth of 12,262 meters. That is approximately 7.6 miles straight down. Then they had to stop. The heat at the bottom reached 180 degrees Celsius, nearly double what they had expected. Their drill bits warped and melted. The rock itself became so soft that it flowed back into the hole like thick liquid. And here was Mel Waters claiming that his fishing line had traveled more than twice that depth using nothing but a simple pulley system. No heat damage, no resistance. Washington State geologist Pat Pringle noted that the heat of the Earth would snap fishing line long before it reached anything close to 80,000 feet. The deepest natural caves in the world provide another point of comparison. Veryovkina Cave in the nation of Georgia holds the current record at 2,212 meters deep. Reaching the bottom takes approximately 4 days and requires multiple underground camps along the way. The entrance is only 3 meters wide, and the journey ends at an underground lake that explorers have named Captain Nemo's Last Stand. Even this remarkable natural formation is barely scratching the surface compared to what Mel described. But if Mel's hole was so obviously impossible, why did the government not simply ignore it? Why send men in hazmat suits? Why threaten a man into silence and exile? The scientific impossibility of the hole only made the government response more suspicious. The man who forgot himself. Mel Waters vanished after 1997. Years passed with no word from him. Most people assumed the story had ended, becoming just another strange tale from late-night radio that would eventually be forgotten. Then, in April 2000, Mel resurfaced with another call to Coast AM. But something was very wrong. His voice had changed. It was slower, more hesitant, filled with confusion. He said he was dying of esophageal cancer. He spoke of being detained in Tacoma, Washington, and waking up with gaps in his memory. There were needle marks on his arms that he could not explain. Several of his back teeth were missing, and he had no memory of any dental procedure. Someone had done something to him. Someone had taken pieces of his mind. Despite the confusion, Mel remained absolutely certain about one thing. The hole was real. Everything he had said before was true, and there was more. And there was more. He revealed that a second hole existed, this one located somewhere in the Nevada desert. This hole was even more heavily guarded than the first, and the things that happened there were far more disturbing. Mel described an incident where researchers lowered a bucket of ice into the Nevada hole to a depth of about 1,500 feet. When they pulled it back up, the ice had transformed. It was still solid, but it had become warm to the touch. The substance no longer looked like ice. It resembled some kind of silica material, and when they tested it, the transformed ice actually burned. The next experiment was more disturbing. Researchers sedated a sheep and lowered the living animal into the hole. When they pulled the sheep back up, it was dead. But death was not the strangest part. When they performed an autopsy, they discovered that the sheep's internal organs had been replaced by a single massive tumor. And inside that tumor was something that looked like a fetal seal with eyes that appeared almost human. The creature was connected to the sheep's body by an umbilical cord. Mel claimed that this seal creature made eye contact with him, and after that contact, his cancer disappeared. He hinted that there was a third hole somewhere secret, possibly outside the United States entirely. He suggested that what had been found in Washington and Nevada were only small pieces of something much larger and much older than anyone could imagine. Mel made his final call on December 20th, 2002. After that broadcast, he was never heard from again. His name was scrubbed from property records. His home sat empty. No trace of him remained. Some say he was silenced. Others say he never existed at all. But the questions he raised refused to die. The Internet awakens. For years, the story of Mel's Hole existed only in old radio archives and the memories of those who had listened live. Then the Internet discovered it, and everything changed. Someone uploaded clips from Mel's original interviews and packaged them as short videos with titles designed to grab attention. Reddit users built elaborate investigation threads with timelines, maps, and evidence boards that resembled cold case files. TikTok creators filmed themselves hiking through the misty forests of eastern Washington, challenging their viewers to help them find the hole. The obsession exploded across every platform. Then, a user calling themselves DepthWalker33 posted something that changed the entire conversation. They shared satellite imagery and GPS coordinates pointing to a location near Manistash Ridge. At first glance, the images showed nothing unusual, just another patch of wilderness. But when people zoomed in, they saw something impossible to explain. Then something suspicious happened. The satellite images changed. The area became blurred almost overnight, obscured in the same way that military installations and classified government facilities are hidden on public mapping tools. Area 51 and the residence of the vice president had received similar treatment in the past. Now the same digital fog had descended on a random patch of Washington forest. For many people, this was the proof they never knew they were looking for. Theories flooded the internet. Some believed the hole was a gravity weapon test site. Others thought it might be a dimensional tear left behind by an ancient civilization. Some proposed it was a natural lava tube extending down to the Earth's mantle. Others believed it was artificial, built by something that was not human. The most disturbing theory suggested that the hole was not really a hole at all. It was a place where reality became thin. Objects dropped inside did not fall in the normal sense. They simply ceased to exist in our world and slipped sideways into somewhere else. That would explain the perfect silence. People stopped just talking about Mel's Hole. They started packing equipment and heading into the wilderness. Drones, thermal cameras, ground-penetrating radar. They were not looking for stories anymore. They were hunting proof. Descent into darkness. In 2023, a team of 5 investigators arrived at the suspected location with equipment that looked like it belonged in a military research facility. They were not amateur ghost hunters or curious hikers. They were producers, drone operators, and experienced researchers who had spent years investigating exactly these kinds of mysteries. Their goal was simple: lower a camera into Mel's Hole, document everything, and prove once and for all whether the legend was real. They assembled a custom-built tethered drone designed to operate in extreme conditions. The machine carried a 4K camera optimized for low-light environments, along with thermal sensors, infrared detectors, and a live data connection. The reinforced cable was engineered to withstand heat, tension, and electromagnetic interference. For the first few hundred feet, the footage showed walls that were far too smooth to be natural. They looked carved and polished, almost manufactured by intelligent hands rather than formed by geology. There were no animal tracks, no dust, no roots, no signs of weathering. Nothing but silence, so heavy, it felt like physical pressure. The audio feed captured nothing at all. No wind, no airflow, just vacuum like emptiness consuming all the space around the camera. Then, the temperature readings began dropping, not gradually, but plunging rapidly past warning thresholds into ranges normally found only in polar regions. The sensors screamed alerts, but the cable showed no frost. At 300 feet, something flickered in the darkness below. A flash of light that was not erratic or bright. It was a glow that pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality, like breathing. The camera refocused and searched for the source of the light. Whatever was glowing was not reflecting off any visible surface. The illumination came from deeper in the hole, but the origin remained invisible. At 400 feet, the glow returned with a shimmering quality like polished glass. The walls of the hole appeared to ripple. Magnetic sensors detected real but faint electromagnetic waves. The compass reading went haywire. The drone began drifting in ways that seemed to defy physics, as if space itself was stretching. At 580 feet, everything froze. Something appeared on the screen. It was not a glitch or a blur. It was a shape, tall and thin, standing motionless between the camera and the dark wall behind it. The figure had no visible face and no color, but it was there, watching, waiting. Then the feed cut to black, and the drone was never seen again. What the camera captured. The drone vanished without warning. One moment the signal was strong, and the next moment there was nothing. The cable went slack, as if whatever had been attached to the other end had simply ceased to exist. When the team pulled the line back up, they found only the frayed end. No camera, no drone, nothing. They retreated from the site visibly shaken. Not because they had failed to find answers, but because they had found something they could not explain. Back at their base, they reviewed every frame of footage that had been recorded before the signal died. The analysis revealed details that no one had noticed during the live descent. The temperature readings confirmed that the sensors were functioning correctly, yet they showed Arctic conditions at a depth where the temperature should have been rising due to geothermal heat. The cold was real, but scientifically impossible. The light pulses appeared in patterns that resembled breathing, or perhaps coded messages. Some frames captured glints on the walls that looked like firelight reflecting off obsidian, even though the drone's lights were the only source of illumination. Infrared sensors detected dense pockets of energy floating in the air like heat shadows, even though everything else registered as freezing cold. Around the 500-foot mark, strange sounds began appearing in the audio. A low hum that grew stronger with depth. The sound was not mechanical interference. It sounded organic, like something vibrating inside the stone itself. The hum fractured into short, low-frequency bursts that some viewers later described as whispers. Audio specialists analyzed spectrograms of the recording and found wave patterns that matched no known language or natural phenomenon. Some compared it to sonar. Others said it resembled reversed human speech that had been stretched and buried under layers of distortion. Then there was the movement. At first, it was barely perceptible, just a subtle shift in brightness. Something had moved between the camera and the dark wall behind it. When the footage was slowed down frame by frame, the shift revealed a tall, thin silhouette, a figure made of what looked like liquid shadow. One member of the team posted the footage on a private forum. Within hours, it had been copied and shared across every major platform: Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, Discord. The video spread like wildfire. Then the strangest thing happened. Accounts that uploaded the video were immediately suspended. Files became corrupted during transmission. Hard drives erased themselves overnight. Takedown notices arrived from unnamed agencies. The video kept resurfacing and vanishing in cycles, as if something very powerful did not want it to be seen but could not quite make it disappear completely. The aftermath was not explosive. It was suffocating. A deep, cold silence descended over everything connected to Mel's hole. The expedition team that had lowered the camera vanished from the internet. Their accounts were deleted or locked. Messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. They existed one day, and the next day they were simply gone. The land itself was sealed off. The area near Manistash Ridge where the expedition had taken place was suddenly surrounded by fencing. Satellite imagery blurred the coordinates once again. Hikers who passed near the zone reported seeing unmarked black vehicles parked at strange angles, heavy trucks hidden among the trees, and unfamiliar men patrolling with radios. Mel Waters himself remained erased. His property documents had disappeared from public records. His home sat empty. Every trail that might have led to answers ended in nothing. The theories continued spreading in whispers across the darker corners of the internet. Some believed the hole was a biological sensor hidden ages ago to monitor human activity on the surface. Others thought it was a prison designed not to keep something out, but to contain something within. What do you think is really at the bottom of Mel's hole? Drop your theories in the comments below because we want to hear what you believe.